Fellow Toastmasters, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you International First Vice President of Toastmasters, Matt Kinsey, Distinguished Toastmaster. Matt Kinsey hails from Coral Springs, Florida, where he is the CEO of the MK Tech Group in Coral Springs, which he started in 2007. He oversees all aspects of an IT consulting firm that services small and medium-sized businesses in South Florida. Matt also holds a master's degree in computer information systems from the University of Phoenix in Arizona. He holds a certificate in strategic management and was recognized with the Silver Beaver Award and the Vigil Honor Award of the Order of the Arrow within the Boy Scouts of America. It's a thing that he and I share in common. I was an environmental science instructor for many, many years at a Boy Scout camp in Connecticut. Matt has been a Boy Scout volunteer for more than 25 years and has held numerous positions within that organization, including district chairman, event chairman, and currently he is a council camping chairman, which means that he holds a role there somewhat similar to program quality director for a large region of South Florida. Matt joined Toastmasters in 2003. He was a charter member of his home club, Outspoken Toastmasters in Coral Springs. He's held a number of high-level positions within Toastmasters. When I first met him, he was a member of the International Board of Directors for, I believe, Region 8. Is that correct?
Yes.
And currently, he serves as one of the officers of the International Board of Directors Executive Committee, where he is a working ambassador for the organization. He works with the board to develop, support, and modify policies and procedures that guide the organization. And as I've said in other channels, the board's decisions can have an immediate effect on club business, or they can take several years for them to come to the level of the club or the member. But the decisions that he helps guide and formulate have a long-term effect on all of our doings. Today, Matt is going to be delivering a presentation called Peloton Leadership about lessons learned from more than 100,000 miles of bicycling. I myself spent a fair chunk of time in the 80s and early 90s bicycling my way from Quebec City to the outer rim of Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia. So I know that there are lessons to be learned from bicycling, but I did a lot of that work alone, and I'm interested to see how team bicycling differs from solo biking. Peloton leadership comes from the Tour de France. You'll take these lessons to heart, and you will ride away today with practical tools that you can apply immediately to make a difference in your leadership style personally and in the leadership of the team that you share with others. It is my great pleasure to introduce Peloton Leadership, Matt Kinsey, International First Vice President of Toastmasters, Distinguished Toastmasters. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Andrew. Do we have any athletes in the room? Or wannabe athletes, or my favorite type of people, used to be athletes? Well, like most kids growing up, I wanted to be good at sports. And quite honestly, I was terrible. Have you ever met anyone who struck out playing t-ball? Well, if you haven't before, you have now. And after one really bad day at a baseball game, I walked up to my dad and said, "Dad, I want to run home." My dad looked at me, he goes, "You want to run home?" I said, "Yeah, I want to run home." Now, we lived in a very small town in Indiana, about 300 people. It was about 3 miles from my house to the baseball field. And I guess my dad figured somebody would pick me up when I collapsed on the side of the road. So he goes, "Go ahead, run home." So I took off running. He got in his car, he drove home. And I got home and he looked at his watch and he looked at me. And he looked at his watch and he said, "Matt, who picked you up?" I said, "No one picked me up. I ran home." Matt, I think we might have found your sport. So I started running. And I loved it. It was a great experience. Finally came the day for my first race. We were up on the starting line. The starter's pistol fired, and I took off running, and I felt like, how many of you remember that television show from the 1970s, the $6 Million Man? You know, and that's when I realized that that's how fast I was actually running, because all of the boys were passing me, and then all of the girls. Out of 173 runners that day, I finished 173rd. I was humiliated, depressed. I walked up to my dad and I said, Dad, that's it. Sports is not for me. I quit. And my dad looked at me with this strange look on his face, and he said the oddest thing. Now you might have thought he would have said, Matt, quitters never win and winners never quit, or you can't quit, you made a commitment. No, he said, Matt, you can't quit. Your team needs you. What? Dad, I couldn't even see the little girl who finished in front of me. Nobody cares that I was here today, and no one will care when I don't show up tomorrow. And he said, Matt, well, you're wrong. First of all, that little girl feels really good today because at least she beat you. Thanks, Dad. But more importantly, when you go back tomorrow, and you will, no one else has an excuse to quit. Your team needs you. Now, I did go back the next day, and I eventually turned into a really good runner. But I've thought about that moment for years. I think as we get older, we actually reflect on the things our parents tried to tell us. And I think all my dad was trying to tell me was the same thing that John Maxwell says. Leadership is influence. It's nothing more, nothing less than the ability of one person to affect the thoughts and actions of another person. Now, because of running, I got into bicycle racing. See, when I got into high school, we had to have practice at 5:30 in the morning. My dad worked from 3 p.m. until midnight every day. And there was no way he was getting up at 5 a.m. to take me to practice. And my mom, forget that one. So we went to Kmart and bought I think it was probably a $59 tent. Yes, I said Kmart. For some of you younger people, that used to be a company that Walmart basically put out of business. But we've got this $59 10-speed bike, and I started biking to school. We got some lights, I got a helmet, and I started biking to school. And one of the days, one of my teammates looks at me and goes, Matt, how long does it take you to get here? And I said, I don't know, 10 or 12 minutes. Now, I lived almost 5 miles from the school. He goes, Matt, you're averaging 24, 25 miles an hour. You're really good at this. And that's when I got into running, into cycling. And cycling brought a joy to me. Running I loved, but cycling gave me a zen peace because I didn't have the pounding on the pavement. It's a smoother experience, at least for me and many others. But finally, I started racing. Now, this was early on, and we were doing a long race, and this is the type of race I was good at. Had a slight uphill finish. And we're coming down this ending chute, and out of the corner of my eye, I see the most beautiful woman I have ever seen in my life. She is an angel. And I turned my head and I looked at her. 25 riders spread out, just like you see here. And it was all my fault. Now, after we got cleaned up and I received a lot of ugly stares from my fellow racers, my coach walked up and he goes, Matt, I hope she was worth it. See, in a bicycle race, when you're traveling at 35, 40 miles an hour down the last sprint, even when you're traveling at 25 miles an hour with inches between you and the people next to you, in front, in behind, both sides, you're completely surrounded. It is not the time to lose focus. You have to be 100% focused. Be present in that moment, or you're going to injure yourself or others. And I think leadership is kind of like that too. When you're leading a team, whether it's in Toastmasters, at your house of worship, at another community organization, at your employment, or even in your family, you have to be focused on those around you and what's going on. I think the secret to presence is in hearing the words that aren't said and seeing the things that aren't seen. Now, let me give you an example. My first year on the executive committee, I had the distinct pleasure of having past international president Lark Doley as my mentor. When you join the executive committee, the immediate past international president serves as your mentor for the first 6 months to a year, which is a great, I think it's a great system. They've been all the way through the chairs that you're going to go through, and now they can help you get oriented and bring you up to speed. After one of our board meetings, we had this long discussion, and somebody had brought something up, and I responded, not in a negative way, but I just didn't think it was necessary to do what was being recommended. And after the call, I got a phone call from Lark. And Lark wasn't happy with me. In fact, she told me she hoped I never did what I'd done there before. Because what had I had done? I had heard the words that were being said, but I had missed the place those words were coming from. You see, the action that was being presented may not have been necessary, but the statement we would have made by taking this action was necessary to help this board member feel comfort and peace in our decision. And I strive every day to keep that in mind. How often do you as leaders get focused on the words and not understand where they're coming from? So one of the things I do very regularly now is if I'm in a discussion with somebody and I don't understand where they're coming from, rather than arguing about the point, rather than trying to debate why I think I'm right and their view is wrong, I'll just normally ask a question like, Andrew, can you tell me what led you to your point of view? Because if I can understand his thought process, the experiences he's had, the education he's had that led him to take this position, then I can be present in the moment. And if we still disagree after that, that's fine. So be present at all moments as a leader, because it's perilous to you and your team when you're not. Shortly after this race, I had started to get good at several different types of races, except for one. And I walked up to my coach one day and I said, Coach, I'm getting really frustrated. It's this criterion race. You know, I get lapped. That means I'm disqualified. I can't finish the race. If I don't finish one of these races, I just don't know what I'm going to do. And he looked at me and goes, well, Matt, you know, that's just part of the process. Just hang in there. You'll be fine. So we take off. Now, a criterion race is usually a time period plus 2 laps or plus 3 laps. And this particular race was 45 minutes plus 2 laps. We hit the 45-minute mark, and I am still on the lead lap. No, I'm not with the leaders, but I'm still on the lead lap. Nobody has lapped me. I'm feeling really good. I finished the next lap. I've got 1 lap to go. I come around the last turn. I can see the finish line about a 1/4 mile away. And all of a sudden, I hear a shout from the crowd. And I look back, and there's my coach, riding as hard as he can to try to ride me down. And all I can think was, I'm a 1/4 mile. I'm going to get disqualified again. No! And somehow I reached down and I got to the finish line just in front of him. Now, I think some of the people in the crowd were confused because they thought I'd actually won. But after the race, I was not happy. And I went and I found my coach. I'm like, Scott, what were you doing to me? I can't believe that. You had the race won. Nobody else was within any distance of you. You didn't have to sprint to beat me. What were you trying to do? And he looked at me and said, well, Matt, there's no gifts in cycling. Oh, and by the way, did you finish the race today? I was actually so mad at him, I had to think about it. And I was like, oh, yeah, I did. You're welcome. There aren't gifts in leadership. I see so many people go into a position of leadership, a district director, an area director, and somehow they think that they're automatically going to get people to follow them. And it doesn't work that way. Even if, now Aki, I'm talking to you right now, even if the district has watched you grow up and now they know it's your turn to district director, they're still figuring out who are you going to be as district director. Now, in our core values, we talk about respect. And there's a basic level of respect that every person is due. But there's also an element of earned respect. And that comes from consistency of action. People knowing who you are and knowing that they can count on you. Are you consistent with your words and actions? Or do you find yourself being inconsistent? Do you behave in a way that is true to your core beliefs? Or do you put on the mantle of leadership and pretend to be some other leader that you've seen who you admire? Authenticity in leadership is so critical because they're not going to give you the gift. You have to earn that last bit of respect so that when there is a discussion and you have to make a ruling as a leader, you've earned the place to do that so that people go, yeah, let's go along with it. I'm not sure I agree with it, but let's go along with it. There's no gifts in cycling, and don't expect any gifts in leadership either. So why does Peloton leadership work? Well, if we have any engineers, especially if they works with fluid dynamics, they probably recognize this diagram. But what you see here is air. So we have air coming on to the front rider. It's coming on straight on. We're just assuming that they're going straight into the wind. And you can see what happens to the individual behind. Look how much less air is hitting them in the face. There's almost no air on their face, just a little bit on their chest, a little more on their legs. A lot of the air goes over the top of them. They're actually doing 1/3 less work at the same speed. And this is the big difference in the Peloton. And this is one of the lessons I want you to get as a leader in your club, in your community. The leader needs to make sure that everybody works together. Because when you work together, you can go faster. And what you'll see if you ever watch a Peloton, you'll see the riders up at the front rotate in and out. Somebody comes up to the front, then they drop back. And then the next person comes up, then they drop back. Next person, and sometimes it happens very rapidly because that group of people, it's kind of like NASCAR, okay? If that group, the longer that group, the faster they can go as a group because each person is spending less energy for a short time and then they drop back and they're conserving energy. Do you do this on your team? Do you share the load with others on your team and allow them to have their moments of leadership? Or do you try to break the wind the entire time? So work together towards your goals. One of the things that's so frustrating to me as a member of the board and as a member of Toastmasters is when I see a distinguished club and I look at the numbers and I realize that only one member of the club earned any educational achievements. Because if you earn all of your points for doing things and getting people to training and bringing new members in, only one member has to earn an educational achievement to be distinguished. And sometimes I see that happen. Or I'll see a club where, 2 people out of 20 earned any awards that year. That suggests to me, especially in the time of Pathways, that you're not sharing the load. So one of the things I'd like you to set a goal for this next year in your club is how many people are going to earn an award. Whether it's a level 1 or a level 5, what percentage of your club is going to earn a level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 award? Because to me, that tells me that you're sharing the load and making sure that Toastmasters is working for all members. So the leadership lesson here is to work together. Now, I haven't really gotten too controversial yet. I think many of these things are things that you would expect in a leadership lesson. But I can tell you this next section is probably where I get the most questions and the most feedback. So this is from the 2017 Tour de France. And for the last 8 years, Team Sky has been the dominant team in cycling. They've changed their name since, but they've been the dominant team. And the gentleman in yellow is a gentleman named Chris Froome, who's won 4 Tour de France's. There's only a handful of people who've legitimately won 5 Tour de France's. They're coming up a mountain right now. And where is he? Now, he's the leader of the team, but he's behind his team because the rest of his team are setting the stage for his victory. People hear about the winner of the Tour de France, but it is truly a team sport because the 4 gentlemen in front of him are doing a few things. One thing they're doing is they're keeping the pace high so nobody else will attack because it hurts too much. So it keeps the group together until Chris is ready to launch his attack. The other thing they're doing is they're breaking the wind for him, as we saw on the last slide. They're making sure that he's protected. They're keeping him at the front of the group because there are less crashes at the front of the group. They're going to peel off one at a time. In fact, the gentleman who's leading right now at this time, I believe, was about 2.5 hours down on the overall race. The only one who was within any close time is the gentleman immediately in front of him, who I believe finished about 15th or 16th that year. So these guys are working together, and what they're doing is they're protecting their leader. They're protecting their leader so that when it comes crunch time, when they're on that last mountain climb, when they're at that last home stretch, Chris, in this case, has the extra energy, that little bit left in the reserve tank, to go out and try to win the race. And when Chris wins the race, the entire team wins. Now, what does that look like in Toastmasters? And I got to be honest, I really struggled with what that looked like. When I was putting this keynote together, I was trying to figure this piece of it out. And I was talking to one of our past international presidents, Pat Johnson. And she looked at me and was like, Matt, how many unfair criticisms did you receive as a district governor? And I was like, yeah, quite a few. And Andrew, I'm sure you received some. And I think Jeff Sobel's on here. And I'm sure Jeff did. And I know Richard did as one of your past district directors. Oh, Andrew just said 1 or 2. Okay, well, you're pretty lucky. You need to protect your leaders. Now, protecting your leaders does not mean giving them a free pass. There's still accountability. But the way you address issues and protect your leaders strong. So one thing you can do is when you protect your leaders, when you hear unfair criticism of a district director, you hear rumors, put an end to it. Stop the rumors. If somebody comes to me and complains about Richard, my first question is, have you talked to Richard? Now, I haven't had it happen this year, but it could. I'm going to tell them to talk to Richard. If someone comes to me and complains about my wife, well, that might be a little different story, but I try to tell them, please go talk to Janine. I'm not Janine. You need to go talk to her, and I'm not going to play an in-between for you. The other thing we need to do is evaluate our leaders in the same spirit, in the same tone that we evaluate speakers. Speakers need 6-to-1 ratio of negative comments, of positive comments to improvement comments. That's what the psychologists tell us. The sandwich approach is great, but don't double stuff the sandwich. Okay? But leaders need constant positive feedback. So when there are those moments where they need to be corrected, you've got the relationship to fall back on. I mentioned to you my conversation with Lark Doley earlier. If we hadn't built a relationship, that could have been damaging. But because she had given me positive feedback as well as suggestions throughout the year, I knew where she was coming from. I knew she appreciated me. I knew that she supported me. And when she got harder with me, it was okay because I could take it, because we had that relationship. Don't give them a free pass, but follow that same advice of building a relationship with your leaders so when you do need to give them feedback, they know that you're supportive of them. You need to protect your leaders on the team, in Toastmasters, at work, wherever you are, because leaders have a big responsibility. You as followers have a responsibility. Now, I don't know how many of you went to manager training in your organizations, and you probably heard things like, well, the manager's job is to remove obstacles from the team. I'm sure several of you have heard that. I know I heard it at Office Depot and Kinko's and other places. And that's true as long as you're talking about things. If there's a structural item in the way, if there's an object in the way, if there's a policy in the way, the leader's job is to address those so that the team can move on. But when it comes to people, it is as much the team's job to remove obstacles from the leader's way as it is here. We have a practice at my company. I do not mind firing a customer. And in fact, my staff will let me know when it's time to fire a customer. They tell me they're taking up too much time. They're taking up too much energy. They're not appreciative. They're abusive on the phone. And so I protect my staff. But my team is telling me we're protecting the organization. And this is somebody who's not a good fit for us. So let's help them find somebody who will work in better. That's how you can protect your leaders. Make sure the team is working towards the goals. Make sure that the feedback is primarily positive and supportive so that the improvement feedback is well received. Before my first race, my coach came to me. He just told me a week ago, Matt, you're in the race this coming weekend. And he said, Matt, I forgot to tell you, you can't race if you don't shave your legs. Like, what? What are you talking about? He goes, you got to shave your legs. So here I am, 15 years old, in the 1980s, going home to my mother to ask, Mom, can you teach me to shave my legs? And her response was, why? And I didn't have a good answer, except my coach had told me. Now, of course, my mother gives me the famous If your friends jumped off a cliff, would you? And I answered, well, it depends on how high it was. Okay. Yeah, I kind of like crazy things like that. So I called my coach. I'm like, Coach, why? Now, I can honestly tell you that since that time and what he told me, I have researched this subject. And I have heard probably 85 different stories about why cyclists shave their legs. One of the stories is that early on, the oil that cyclists used on chains was, kind of like motor oil. So it got really thick and sprayed on you. It's a lot easier to clean your legs off after a bike ride with oil on than without hair. It kind of makes sense. Oh, one of them was that if you crash and you slide on the pavement, the hair rips little pieces of skin out, so you get a cleaner cut and it's easier to clean up and take care of. That kind of makes sense. And there is a very, very, very slight, and I know I'm using very a lot, but it's just such a minuscule amount of benefit for aerodynamics. But here's the reality. The reason cyclists shave their legs today is because it's tradition. And it's a tradition that does no harm to anyone. Now, I know your club, wherever you are, has traditions or is in the process of establishing traditions if you're in your club. District 53, I'm certain, has many traditions. Traditions bind us together. When we created Pathways as an organization, the thing I'm most pleased with is that we kept the icebreaker. Because the icebreaker is part of our tradition. Yes, there's educational benefit to the icebreaker. It sets your level. But more importantly, it's an experience that every single member of the organization who has done a speech has gone through, or they're anticipating. So if I travel anywhere in the world with Toastmasters, and I'm trying to start up a conversation, and it's a little awkward, all I have to do is say, well, tell me about your icebreaker speech. And then we instantly have a connection. Because I did my first icebreaker, they did their first icebreaker. We could talk about how we felt, what the experience was like, what the evaluation was like, how relieved we were to sit down. That bond is part of our culture. Shaving your legs is part of the cycling culture. Now, not all traditions are healthy. We've certainly seen in the news over the last year things that have traditionally been done that have negative impact. We can think of traditions that have been set aside for good reason. So you need to ask yourself with a tradition, is it serving us well? Is it neutral, or is it harming us? And if it's serving your organization well, or if it's neutral, then there's not a reason to get rid of the tradition. But if the tradition is harmful, those are the traditions that you need to eliminate from your program, from your company. You need to honor tradition because it's part of the culture that binds your team together. Many of you may recognize this gentleman. For those of you who don't know who it is, his name is Lance Armstrong, and you probably recognize the name. Lance was my hero. Here was a man who went and won a world championship, developed a very aggressive form of testicular cancer, went through treatments, came out of treatments, learned to ride a bike all over again, had to rebuild all of his strength, and then went out and won 7 Tour de France's in a row. Well, apparently he had. Lance not only let me down as a fan of the sport, He went after people. People who knew what he was doing. One of his teammates' wives told the story, and he destroyed her. He destroyed her reputation. He made her look foolish. Until finally he showed up on Oprah Winfrey and admitted that it was all based on performance-enhancing drugs. It was all based on a lie. Our values matter. Integrity matters. In fact, it matters more than winning. Now, I've heard, if you're not cheating, you're not playing. And yes, I'm not talking about those little pushes against the boundary that happen in organized sports. I'm not talking about the deception that happens in American football, where the rules of the game are clear that you're trying to deceive the other team into doing something so that you can take advantage of it. Those are the rules of the playing field that are well known and understood. What I'm talking about is breaking the rules, not bending them, not turning a blind eye, but just consciously and completely knowing the rules and disregarding them in the pursuit of a Tour de France, in the pursuit of distinguished status, in the pursuit of an educational award. Did you really earn it if you had to cheat to get it? Now, I was speaking to a district a few weeks ago, and I got a question in the Q&A that I'd never had before. They asked me, what would I say to Lance Armstrong if I got a chance to meet him today? And my honest answer is I really don't care to meet with him. But I've forgiven him. And so what would I tell him? Lance, you paid a high price for the actions you took. And I wish you well. It's the only thing I can do. I had to forgive him. Not that my forgiveness means anything to him. It doesn't. He doesn't know who I am. He doesn't remember that we rode in one race together 40 years ago, almost. But I had to forgive him for me. I had to forgive him so that I didn't have the love of my sport torn away from me. So that I didn't have this hole that could be filled with negative energy and negative thoughts. So I've forgiven him for myself. He needs to deal with his own demons. Your values matter. And you have to be able to forgive people when they break their values. Values matter more than winning. Several years ago, I was at a conference outside of Scottsdale, Arizona. And at lunch, the MC came up and said, "Hey, everyone, over lunch today, I want you to go out on the streets and find a stranger and take him or her to lunch." I messed up. Let's go back here. Sorry about that. We'll get back to that story. These four gentlemen here are the four winners of the Tour de France in 2018. Notice I didn't say the winner. I said the four winners. The gentleman in the white jersey was the young rider winner for riders under the age of 25. The rookie of the year, so to speak. He had the lowest elapsed time of anybody under the age of 25. The gentleman in the polka dot jersey, he's the best climber. So when it came to the mountains, he went up the mountains better than anybody, and he got more points in the mountains competition than anyone else. The gentleman in the green, Peter Sagan, possibly the best cyclist in the world over the last 5 years because he can do so many different things. He won the points competition which is for the most consistent and best sprinter of the group. And the gentleman in yellow, Geraint Thomas, well, he was the overall winner of the Tour de France. He had the lowest elapsed time. There are multiple definitions of success in the Tour. There's a team competition. There are daily competitions. There is more than one way to succeed. And teams come in knowing that perhaps they don't have someone who can compete for the overall, and they'll focus on the sprinting or a hamstring. Other teams like Cofidis, they focus on winning one stage race because those stage wins are huge for their sponsors to get on TV. There's even a winner of the Lanterne Rouge, which is the red light. Kind of like the red light your mom might put out looking for you. It's the last place finisher of the Tour de France. And in fact, he can earn a lot of money in fees after the race because there's success in just finishing out an arduous task like the Tour. And this last year has been difficult for Toastmasters and other organizations, companies, and each of you has had your own struggles, I'm certain, over the last year with isolation, with business issues. And some of us have lost people that we care about very much to this pandemic. There's so much success that we have to define over the last year. For some of your clubs, just keeping your doors open is a reason to celebrate. For some of our clubs, each individual who earns an achievement or takes the skills that they learned in Toastmasters and goes out and starts a business or goes out and gets a promotion at work or goes out and closes that sale because of the presentation that they practiced in your club, that is a reason to celebrate. Now, am I suggesting distinguished status doesn't matter? No, not at all. We know distinguished status matters. But what I am suggesting is it's not the only thing that matters. The quality of your club may be reflected in your distinguished status. But the quality of your club comes in lives changed from the Toastmasters program. And people taking those skills that they learned, that self-confidence that they developed, and making a difference in their world through their voice and through their leadership. There are so many ways to define success as an organization that we need to make sure that we celebrate all of those wins. The mountains. Well, the mountains are the fun time. The mountains are where the Tour is won. This is stage 12 of the 2018 Tour de France, won by Geraint Thomas, the same gentleman that we saw a few minutes ago. And this was the stage where he created enough separation that no one else caught him. Now, this doesn't really give you a sense of how difficult this is. This is just a chart, and you really can't tell, and it's not the same scale from one side to the next. So let me give you a picture taken from the Alpe d'Huez. Now, the Alpe d'Huez is not the most difficult ride in all of cycling. It's among them, but it's the most famous because more Tour winners have set the stage on the Alpe d'Huez than almost any other mountain climb. Look at these gentlemen. These are the best bikers in the world. And you can just see how hard they are working to get this up this hill. And they're doing about 15 miles an hour when they're normally riding at 27, 28 miles an hour. You can see Geraint Thomas in the yellow there. He has one team member left in front of him, and his other two, you can see two or three of his other team members who were starting to drop off the pace. And 4 of these 5 guys in the front were the top 4 finishers in the Tour de France. When it comes to the mountains, that's where the winners are made. There's a saying that you can lose the Tour de France in the first week in the flatlands. You can't win it. You can lose it, but you can win it in the mountains. So how do you tackle a mountain? And this is just as true in leadership as it is in cycling. One is you have to know the profile. I showed the profile. You need to know when is the right time based on your skill set, your energy, your knowledge to attack, and when it's time to let somebody else do the attacking. You need to know what's coming up as much as you can. Now, we live in a very uncertain world right now, and it's hard to see the future. You just have to do the best you can. In fact, Colin Powell, former Secretary of State, when he was a general, said you only need to know between 20 and 60% of the available information in order to make a decision. If you don't have at least 20%, you don't know enough. If you have more than 60%, you waited too long to make the decision. So know the profile. Have a plan and know that plan isn't going to work. But you still want to approach it with a plan. We know when we plan to attack, when we plan to pick up the pace. You still have to be able to respond to what your competitors do, but you need to have your plan. You measure your effort. If you go out too hard, you don't have enough energy. If you wait too long, you don't allow anybody else. You allow everybody else to stay with you because they've got the same energy. You have to measure your effort. In fact, cyclists today carry a, no pun intended, a watt meter on their board that tells them how much energy they're producing. And they watch that very carefully throughout the race. So they know how much energy they have left and they know what level of effort they can sustain. So you have to be prepared. Timing is everything. Attacking at the wrong time doesn't do you any good. Leaders perform in the mountains. So when you go into leading the Peloton, there's a few things I want you to think about. Being present. Don't expect gifts. You need to work together and protect your leaders. Honor tradition and keep your values in mind. Most of all, know that there are many ways to succeed, but true leaders perform when the going gets tough in the mountains. We are going to go, I'm going to leave this up, but we are going to go into questions now. So please post your questions in the Q&A. Andrew will pass those on to me and I will respond. I think we have about 10 minutes available for the Q&A. I am going to ask that you focus on questions related to the presentation at this time.
I'm speaking for the whole district when I say that this is a great presentation and you have given us so many thoughts. I'm looking for questions in the chat window, and if there are questions that seem like they will lead to productive dialogue, I may even invite a couple of you up on stage. So please post your questions in the chat, and if there's questions that lend themselves to sort of a broader discussion, we'll invite a few people up as well.
Andrew, I know you've always got great questions. You want to get them started here with something? Oh, I see John posted something.
Yeah, John started off with a great question, which is, do you see value in a leader's in the path placing obstacles?
Okay, John, come up on screen. I want to explore this with you.
Michael, can you invite John up to the stage, please?
I just want to know what you mean by this. I think I got it, but I want to make sure. So John, as you're coming up, what I think I'm hearing is, do you think there's value for a leader to put obstacles in the team of the path? Is that what you're saying? We're not getting John on quite yet, so I'm going to go with that. John, maybe we're seeing him. John, you want to give me a thumbs up? Did I interpret your question correctly? Okay, I got two thumbs up.
Matt, I'm here now.
So
Matt, it just took a minute to come off mute. I think you reinterpreted my question correctly, but what my question was is, do you see that? Thank you for the opportunity, by the way, and thank you for letting me clear this up. Do you see value in a leader's placing intentional obstacles in the pathway of a mentee?
In very specific instances, there might be that opportunity. So if you think about an athletic team, they place obstacles in front of you during training so that when you can go to perform in the game without those obstacles, you think about swimmers. They'll swim in regular shorts during training, and then they put on the fast suits during a competition because it helps them gain extra strength. You think about weight trainers. They're lifting huge obstacles, hundreds of pounds of weight in order to tear down the muscles and build them back up. I think the more important thing is to allowing your team members to fail and learn those lessons. So in the Scouts, we talk about catching the kid just before he falls on his face. You don't want him to actually fall on his face, but you want to catch him just when he's scared that he's going to fall on his face, and then you go, hey, I'm here to help you out. So when I was at Kinko's, I was a general manager in downtown Houston. One of my employees came to me as a job due the next day, and he goes, well, Matt, how do I run this job? And I said, well, how do you think you should run it? And the answer he gave me was completely wrong. And I told him, go ahead, run it that way. And he came back to me. He was pretty upset with me. He's like, why'd you let me do that? I'm like, for two reasons. One is I want you to know I trust you to learn from your mistakes. And number two, will you ever try to run a job that way again? He's like, no. It took him a few years, but he finally got the lesson that I trusted him and I was empowering him to make decisions on his own. He didn't have to come to me for everything. So in very, very niche specific circumstances, I could see the value of placing an obstacle on your team. But in general, it's probably a bad idea.
Matt, if I can point
Matt,
out
thanks for
that's
that.
a parallel.
Yeah, John, we can continue that discussion offline later if you want. But I did see we've gotten several questions in. I want to get to as many questions as I can.
While Mohan's question, I think, is relevant, which is what is the hardest or toughest decision you had to take as a leader?
I'll just share. Look, I've had a lot of tough decisions. We had a lot of tough decisions on the board last year. But I had a gentleman who I had hired when I was in Kinko's in Houston. He was living in a homeless shelter when I hired him. He worked his butt off. He was one of the best employees I had ever had. And then I get a phone call at 7 o'clock in the morning from my opening shift manager that the safe is open and that there's $1,000 missing. And I come into work, I pull up the videotape, and I see this employee opening the safe, walking back and forth to the production floor multiple times, looking at the safe. You could see he is agonizing over this decision about whether he's going to take the money or not. And finally, he took the money and he left the store. I felt betrayed. Not just because it was an employee, but because I had gone out of my way and hired somebody that many people might not have given a chance. And I finally got in touch with him, and the owner was very gracious. And the owner said, if he returns the money, I won't press charges. And I called him, and he brought the money back. And it was the most difficult decision I made was what was the discussion that I was going to have with him. And I was just like, Tracy, why? Tell me, why did you do this? And he came to me and he told me that his homeless shelter told him he had to move out because he had a job now. And he didn't have enough money for the down payment. And I didn't have the relationship with him where he was willing to come to me and tell me. That hurt. Because I would have helped him. The owner would have given him an advance because I'd seen him do it many times before. And that decision of how I was going to have that conversation, because I knew I had the chance to change the trajectory of somebody's life. And fortunately, he took that graciousness from the owner and from the way I presented him, and he turned himself around. And I spoke to him about 2 years ago. And he's remarried. He has a house. He's doing really well. But that was a tough decision. How do you handle betrayal? You can make it really bad, or you can seek to find some peace out of it.
Thank you, Matt. I think that your story touches on the question that Jim B. asked, which is, how have you seen others grow through these principles? It seems like Tracy did, in fact, grow. You found a way to protect this leader and to work together. You want to say more about how you see people grow using the principles of Peloton leadership?
But this is my story, okay? So I can talk about how I grew. And Jeff and Bet, who I think Bet's in the room as well, they've known me longer than anyone else in the district has. Jeff and I served as district governors together. And I had this barrier up between me and other people that prevented them from knowing who I was. And when that barrier came down and I brought that barrier down, the way people responded to me changed. Because I was focused on working together. I wasn't expecting a gift just because I was a district governor and knew so many things. I was present, and I think that's probably the biggest point is presence. It's so easy to get distracted. I can tell you, one of your district members, Richard Peck, when I think of Richard and the way I've seen him grow, I look at the way he has protected our leaders in the organization and focused on that this year, how he's honored tradition. And I can tell you, values matter to Richard. They really do. And we've even had conversations about the many ways that people succeed in Toastmasters. And he's spoken about that in districts and in conferences and in clubs that he's visited. And over this past year, we've been in the mountains as an organization. And I think our board has performed. And a lot of that is the leadership that Deepak and Richard have brought over the past 2 years. So these principles can help anybody out. And they're not difficult to try. You don't have to have some kind of grand plan. There's no mathematical formulas. There's no huge checklist. Just these principles here, these 7 or 8 principles. Focus on the principle. Are you present? Are you trying to earn the respect of those around there? Are you working together? Those things, those questions you ask yourself can make a difference every day.
That's excellent. Thank you. We have another question from Shira Cohen. What do you look for in a mentor if you have a choice?
Well, you always have a choice in your mentor. If Lark and I had not been a good fit, I would have asked for another mentor. So what do I look for? I look for someone who's compatible with me. So when someone calls me asking, Matt, I'd like you to mentor them, I have a conversation. And I'm like, first, if you don't like direct conversation, I'm not a good fit for you. I don't beat around the bush. And when someone's mentoring me, I don't want them to beat around the bush. That doesn't work for everybody. Some people need to have things a little softer. So I let them know that I'm not a good fit for that. The other thing I look for in a mentor is I look for somebody who I respect. And that's really important. Because if I've had mentoring relationships where I felt it was the person asked me to mentor them more because they wanted to be able to say that they were being mentored by the district governor or being mentored by an international director. So I also look for anonymity. You know, other than that public situation where everybody knows that immediate past international president mentors the second, and then the board, we all know who each other's mentors are. When Toastmasters members come to me for mentoring, I tell them the first time I hear from someone else that I'm mentoring them, the mentoring relationship's over. Because I want to make sure it's about the relationship and not about the public persona of the relationship. I look for people who can help me in specific areas. So I have multiple mentors. One of the mentors I worked with was somebody who came into the executive committee at about the same age as I did. Until this year, I was the youngest person on the committee by a few years. So I have a little bit different life experience. And so I'm looking for people who do that, but I'm also looking for people who stretch me. So finding people from different cultures to mentor me, finding people who view the world differently than I do in whatever way, or who think differently than I do is a great way to stretch your mentoring. And in fact, when I was looking for a mentor, I'd asked several people who they'd recommend, and a particular past president came up a lot. And I called up our CEO, Dan Rex. I was like, Dan, who would you recommend? And he goes, well, man, I bet you everyone's telling you to go with this individual, but you need to go with this individual because he will stretch you more in ways that I think you need to be stretched from working with you 2 years on the board. And he was completely right. So I asked for advice on what others see in me that perhaps I don't see, so I can find somebody who can mentor me in those areas. So those are just a few thoughts on what I look for in a mentor.
Which I think brings us to our final question, which is, who was your best mentor and why? And I'm going to modify this question a little bit because you've just said that name dropping is not really a great thing to do when it comes to your mentors. So rather than talk about who the person is, talk about why you would choose a particular mentor and how you would go about identifying the specific skill set that a mentor can probably help you stretch.
Well, I don't mind name dropping that my father was the best mentor I ever had. And I would not do him service if I didn't mention that. What I look for is I have to be open to what my blind spots are. So I get feedback from those around me, and I ask them, I asked a past international president a really tough question when I was getting ready to run for the board. I'm like, what do you see in me that you don't think I'm aware of, that you think that I need to work on? That's a scary question. You know, and what she told me was my immediate reaction was, I don't do that. She told me I was flippant about the organization. And I was like, what? I'm very serious about this organization. But I had to reflect on that and realize that, yes, I was serious, but it wasn't coming across that way to others. So there was a time where I thought I was being open to discussion, but other people saw me as being closed-minded, where I thought I was being warm and opening, and other people saw me as being fake, where I thought that I was coming across one way, but others were seeing me in a different way. And that lack of self-awareness really can inhibit your leadership development. So I look for people who can help me see the things in me that I don't see in myself. And who have the the courage in a positive way to share that with me. Because it's so critical. Because I can only work on the things that I'm aware of. And I can tell you, I hear from comments from people, and Jeff and Donna Sobel would probably agree. They probably see me very differently than they did in 2012 and 13. Do I feel different inside? A little bit. Do they see a huge difference? Yes. Because they're seeing who I am, or at least who I'm attempting to be, that's true to who my values and true to my outlook on the world. That doesn't mean I'm content. I'm content with who I am, but that doesn't mean I don't want to also get better. So those are the things I look for. I don't want a mentor who's going to try to please me or be a yes man. I want somebody who's going to challenge me and stretch me and is willing to drop me if I'm not giving their advice and their suggestions due consideration. That doesn't mean I have to do everything they suggest, but they need to see that I'm thinking about it and that some of the stuff is resonating, even if not everything does. Most mentoring relationships I've dropped is because the person does the exact opposite of whatever I suggest to them. And I kind of figured it out, and I started playing the game of, okay, I'll give them the opposite advice so they'll do what I want them to do. And yeah, that, as you can guess, that didn't work out well because I didn't believe the advice I was giving them, and they could see that. So there's got to be a lot of give and take, and mentoring relationships are so critical. And that's why I've got multiple mentors, because some of them see different things in me to grow on than others do. So really, keep getting mentored. Keep offering to mentor. I think it's our duty as a leader to have both. Be mentored and mentor others. So District 53, I'm going to do something that I know Toastmasters frowns on, and I don't care. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit of my story with you. I hope you at least give it some consideration. I hope that something I said, even if it's just one thing, triggers some of you, at least one person, to take a different action this week as a result of that. And if that happens, I will be so pleased. I wish I could be there in person with you. This is the next best thing. The world is starting to open up, but know that my heart is with you there in District 53. Thank you for your time and attention today. Mr. District Director.